Painkiller Ghosts. Chapter 8, An Erratic History of Thyme, Part 4. Thyme thought he was always running out of it. Time, that is. He often felt that the hours and the seconds were cruising through his fingers in front of his blue eyes. He thought that with time, his eyes might change color. Sometimes kids are born with blonde hair and it turns brown. Maybe my eyes will turn brown, he says. Suzanne Exler smiles and flips through a remodeling magazine, patient for her tea that's steeping in her mug within reach. Or green, he'd say, not wanting her to think that he didn't like the color of her eyes. They're just fine as they are, son. You're fine as you are. That was when Time felt he had no time, and he was Timothy. Now, he's Time, and time's all he's got. It seems to Time, the majority of conversations he's had with Mama in the past, say, 20 years, have taken place at this table. On the same chairs which get new stains and then reupholstered every 5 years. And if not here, they're in her car, driving around too fast, talking too slowly. Maybe she got that mug over there, the one in the sink, when Time was in high school. The high school that he now lives within walking distance from. His guidance counselor was a man in his 50s with an olive complexion, one front tooth, and a beer belly. In a paisley tie, he'd sigh heavily and say, "Mr. Hexler, you're not working up to your potential." Timothy raised an eyebrow, slight shrug. "You haven't turned in your physics homework in 3 weeks. Do you realize that? 3 weeks. Okay. What do you plan to do next year? Community college?" He wipes his forehead and sighs. "The military, perhaps?" No military. No more school either. I'm in no hurry to go anywhere. Time, then Timothy, made some money working at a restaurant for a while after graduation, and after a year or so he bought a camera and some tools, table saw, a hammer, and he quit the restaurant and started working in carpentry, working for a neighbor. But he always wanted to be a photographer. Even now, years later, as he's back living with Mama a decade and a half after he graduated from high school, he'll turn the television and see pictures of a big earthquake, of burning poppy fields, burning embassies, and mention about how he wanted to be there, taking those pictures. Photojournalism is just employment, Suzanne lectured her son 2 days ago at the kitchen table, and it's suicide. She's always sipping tea. Avoided employment and suicide. NPR voices are speaking in relaxed tones about levees bursting and oil pipelines being bombed, hurricanes, Cuba flooded, Jamaica somehow spared the day before, the Mexican army is being kidnapped by drug cartels' thugs, and the rain rapes and the wind ravages. Time is thinking about his camera, the lens, the flash. Later that afternoon, Time is in the kitchen, smoking a joint and cutting carrots for a salad Mama is making, and he slices his hand. The blood falls into the orange carrots, staining them red. Time picks up the pieces, washes the blood off, and holds the bleeding hand under the cold running water as he chomps into some of the carrots. A taste of blood mixes with the sweetness of the small carrots. The water keeps on running, he keeps on munching carrots. With his other hand, the one that's not bleeding, he turns off the water. Then he picks up a semi-clean wash rag and holds it against the open cut, and he walks outside, thinking about smoking, tasting blood-dripped carrots on his tongue. He walks to the back door, opens it, leaves it ajar, and sits on the back steps, staring out into the yard, daydreaming. His eyes are wide, his wound is throbbing, his head hurts. He wishes he was tired, but he's not. His hand feels swollen, but is not. He can feel the pulse in his cut. He walks around to the front of the house and sits on the concrete steps watching the traffic. Cars are parked alongside the road. He wishes he had one, a car. As he watches, a large blackbird comes down and lands on the closest car, still 15 or 20 feet from where Time is sitting. The bird freezes from motion and sits in the car perfectly still. And Time thinks he can hear the bird growling at him, a deep, guttural sound like a didgeridoo played in a dark, dank cave. The bird stares and stares, and Timothy stares back, forgetting about the throbbing in his fingers. After a few minutes, Thyme gets up and runs towards the bird, who doesn't move, but stares and growls some more, apparently unaffected by Thyme's approach. Thyme barks towards the growling bird, but gets no response. Thyme sneezes. The bird yawns, growling the whole duration of the yawn, and when the yawn is over, the bird stretches out his wings, cocks his head, and takes flight, aiming directly at Thyme. The bird gets uncomfortably close to Thyme, and Thyme momentarily forgets about the wounded hand, and he holds up both hands in front of his face to deflect this winged adversary. When the bird gets close, it stops his devilish growl and grips the blood-soaked dish rag and pulls it away from Thyme and caws once from deep in his throat, then flies away above the sidewalk, dripping little blood patterns onto the asphalt below. And Thyme runs behind it for a little bit, he too dripping blood. As he walks back to his house, he follows a trail of blood and finds himself looking over his shoulder for the massive black bird's return, but it never does. And each time that Thyme goes out for a walk, his bare feet step on his dry blood. He's walking the next day, and he scrapes his toe and bends down to make sure the toenail is still attached. It is. And a black feather falls from the sky above him. But by the time he's picked up the feather and decided his toenail wasn't going to fall off today, he looks up into the sky and he cannot see any birds at all. He doesn't hear any birds calling or singing, and certainly not one growling at him. Mama? Yes, Thyme. I think a bird is out to get me. Thyme, I know what you're going to say, Mama. There are things I don't understand about this world yet, or something like that. Mama looks back down at the paper in front of her and goes back to sipping her tea and says, "No, actually." "No what?" "No, I wasn't going to say that." She's silent, offers no more conversation. After a minute, Thyme asks, "What were you going to say?" She puts her tea down, closes the paper, and says, "It's a two-parter, an either or." "What is, Mama?" My response. "And that is what?" "Well, first, I say you smoke too much pot." "Fair enough." Second, I stay away from that bird if I were you." "Mama?" Yes, Thyme. "Do you think that was a painkiller ghost?" "I'm not sure that was a ghost. But if it was, it didn't seem normal." "Did it make you feel better?" "No." "Well then, there you go." She raises an eyebrow and smiles for a second, then breaks eye contact and stares out the window. She looks back at the table for a second and then takes the final sip from her tea, smiles, gets up, her cell phone and a paperback book from the counter in her hand. She waves and walks away. Thyme hears her car start. He looks out the window, expecting to see the big black bird peering back at him and growling, but doesn't.